He saw the faded scrubs 2 sizes too large, the way she walked with eyes down, shoulders curved inward like someone trying to disappear. He didn't see the way her hands never trembled during codes. He didn't see the perfect economy of motion that comes from muscle memory forged under fire. He didn't see the pair of worn combat boots tucked in the back of her locker, caked with Baghdad sand that never quite washes out. Sarah Chen works the night shift at Oak Creek Memorial in San Diego. The emergency department runs on fluorescent lights that hum like trapped insects and linoleum floors that smell of antiseptic and old coffee. She moves through the corridors at 11:30 at night like a ghost who has learned the route so well she could walk it blind. Competent. Invisible. The kind of quiet that makes people forget you're in the room. Her fingers are steady when she starts falls that other nurses miss on the second or third attempt. Her voice is soft, almost apologetic, when she talks the drunk man with the slashed wrist down from his rage, or when she holds the hand of the 78-year-old woman whose heart is deciding whether it wants to keep beating. There's a thin scar that runs from her right temple to her jawline, barely visible unless you know to look for it, and she never touches it or explains it. The scar is the kind that doesn't come from car accidents. The scar is the kind that teaches you something about survival. During a trauma code, Sarah anticipates every need before the doctor asks. The setup is ready. The pressure infuser is charged. The blood warmer is running. She moves with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who has done this under circumstances that would break most people. A 23-year-old kid with a stab wound to the abdomen, bleeding faster than the fork can replace it. Sarah doesn't panic. She doesn't raise her voice. She simply moves, and everything she touches falls into place like a piece of machinery reassembling itself. Dr. Sterling watches her from the corner of the trauma bay, and something in her precision unsettles him. She moves like someone trained by an authority higher than his. She moves like someone who has served. In her locker on the third shelf, behind the extra stethoscope and the roll of medical tape, there's a photograph in a frame that has been handled so many times the glass has acquired a fine network of scratches. The frame is wood, worn smooth by fingers that have touched it every shift for 7 years. The photograph shows a Navy SEAL in full dress uniform, standing in front of an American flag. The insignia on his chest reads like a resume of sacrifice: warfare pin, combat diver's badge, the anchor of a sailor. His eyes are the color of clear water, and he's smiling like he knows something no one else does. His name was Michael. His rank was Chief Petty Officer. His last words to Sarah were spoken in the dark at 2 in the morning, "Come home to me." She touches that frame now like it's a prayer she hasn't finished saying. Sarah arrives at 11:45 on a Tuesday night in November. The parking lot at Oak Creek Memorial stretches like a dark ocean under sodium lights that turn everything the color of old bone. Her car is a 2008 Honda Civic with one working headlight and a dent in the driver's side door from a hit-and-run 5 years ago that she never bothered to fix. She's worn the same pair of white nursing shoes for 14 months, the leather cracked along the seams, the soles worn thin in the places where her weight falls heaviest. She changes into scrubs in the bathroom of the break room, hanging her street clothes on a hook that's missing its plastic cap. The scrubs are a size large when she wears a medium. That's intentional. Invisible cloth for an invisible woman. The night shift smells different than the day shift. It smells like the people who come to the emergency room when their life has already fallen apart and there's nowhere else to go. It smells like sweat and fear and the sharp chemical tang of disinfectant deployed over blood that won't come completely clean. The fluorescent lights above the nurse's station flicker at intervals that used to drive her crazy 7 years ago. Now she doesn't notice them anymore. Now she just moves through the light and shadow like they're the same thing. Sarah's hands are catalogued in the computer at Oak Creek Memorial as registered nurse. Her hands have placed 1,247 full lines without missing once. Her hands have held dying people who had no family waiting in the lobby. Her hands have been placed on a Bible during a ceremony that declared her legally dead, her service record sealed and filed in a basement vault somewhere in the Pentagon, her existence officially erased from the history books. Those same hands look small now. Delicate. Unremarkable. She begins her shift at the medication station, checking the inventory against the forms. morphine, fentanyl, propofol. Medications that ease suffering and sometimes end it. The night charge nurse, a woman named Diana who has been at Oak Creek for 18 years and learned not to ask questions, passes her a clipboard. You're with me on beds 4 through 8 tonight. Bed 6 is a migraine, bed 7 is the drunk who cut his hand, bed 4 hasn't seen a doctor yet. Sarah nods. She knows how this works. She knows how it always works. She moves toward bed 4 with a clipboard tucked against her chest like a shield. The patient in bed 4 is a woman named Margaret, 51 years old, presenting with chest pain that started while she was making dinner for her grandchildren. Sarah puts on gloves that snap like gunshots in the quiet of the early night. She performs a 12-lead EKG with movements that are precise and practiced, the electrodes placed exactly where they need to be, the leads attached without hesitation. The machine prints out results that are normal, nothing remarkable, nothing that suggests her heart is at war with itself. Margaret asks Sarah if she's going to be okay. Sarah tells her the doctor will review the results very soon. She doesn't use the word fine because fine is a lie and Sarah stopped lying a long time ago. In bed 7, the drunk man is sleeping now, his hand bandaged, the bleeding stopped. Sarah checks his vital signs every 30 minutes. Blood pressure 120/80. Heart rate 84. Oxygen saturation 98% on room air. These numbers are the language of survival. These numbers are the only conversation happening in the dark of the emergency department at midnight on a Tuesday when the world outside is asleep and the world inside is breaking down in real time. Dr. Sterling arrives for his shift at 1 in the morning, 15 minutes late because he was finishing drinks with the other attending physicians at the Coronado Golf Club, where the martinis cost $23 and the conversation centers on whose mortgage payment is the highest and whose sailboat is the newest. He walks through the emergency department with the satisfaction of a man who has arranged his entire existence to serve himself. His stethoscope is expensive, a Littmann Cardiology 4 with a carbon fiber chest piece that he uses more for aesthetic purposes than actual examination. His shoes are Italian leather, hand-stitched, worth more than Sarah's monthly rent. His watch is a Rolex Submariner, stainless steel and gold, a gift from a hospital board member whose daughter he once treated for an anxiety disorder and who happened to be married to a pharmaceutical executive. Dr. Sterling surveys his domain from the entrance of the emergency department. His eyes move across the space with the calculating gaze of a man identifying inefficiencies. Too many patients. Not enough beds. The night shift nurses look tired. And then his eyes land on Sarah, and something in the calculation changes. She's standing at the medicine station, checking a medication order, her shoulders curved inward, her face down, her hair pulled back in a braid that's starting to come loose from the weight of the shift. She looks like someone's mother who works because she has to, not because she has a purpose. She looks like someone who should be grateful to have this job. She looks, to Dr. Sterling, like a problem. Nurse. His voice carries across the department like a command delivered to a subordinate. Sarah looks up from the medication chart. Yes, doctor. Her voice is soft. Her voice is deferential. Her voice is exactly what he expects from someone in her position. He watches her for a moment longer, long enough for her to feel the weight of his attention, long enough for her to understand that he has decided something about her. Then he turns and walks toward his office, where he will spend the next hour reviewing patient charts and thinking about Sarah Chen in the way that predators think about prey that hasn't yet realized it's being hunted. The night deepens toward 3 o'clock. Sarah is in bed 6 with the migraine patient when the decision is made. She's placing a cool washcloth across the woman's forehead, dimming the lights, checking the 4 rate on the pain medication that's finally starting to work. The medication is working because Sarah positioned the 4 correctly and because she's adjusted the rate to the exact specification that will provide relief without causing complications. These are the things no one notices. These are the things that separate good nursing from the kind that saves lives. Diana passes by and says, "He's asking about staffing." Sarah doesn't look up from the migraine patient. She knows who Heath is. She knows what this means. She knows the conversation is already happening, somewhere in the hospital, in the places where decisions are made by people in power suits and golf club memberships. Diana continues, he's telling the night supervisor that the ER is overstaffed on night shifts. That we could do with one fewer nurse. Sarah nods very slowly. She understands exactly what's being communicated. She's being identified. She's being targeted. She's being hunted in the way that institutions hunt people they've decided don't matter. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part comes at 3:47 in the morning when Dr. Sterling gathers the entire night shift nursing staff in the break room for what he calls a quick meeting. The break room smells like stale coffee and the collective exhaustion of people who have chosen to work when the rest of the world sleeps. There are 6 nurses present, including Sarah. Dr. Sterling stands in the doorway like he owns the room, which in a sense he does, because authority in a hospital belongs to the doctors and everything else is subordinate. I've been observing the night shift staffing, Dr. Sterling says, his voice carrying the false warmth of someone delivering bad news. And I think we need to streamline. Get more efficient. He pauses, letting the silence accumulate. I'm going to make a bet. There's someone on this team who's not cut out for the pressure, who's going to recognize they don't belong here, and they're going to quit within a week. His eyes find Sarah across the break room. His eyes stay on Sarah. 1 week. That's how long I give our quietest nurse before she realizes she's in over her head. The room doesn't move. The room doesn't breathe. The other nurses are studying their coffee cups like they contain the secrets of the universe. Sarah's face doesn't change. Her jaw doesn't clench. Her breathing doesn't accelerate. She simply accepts the words the way soldiers accept orders, with the knowledge that resistance is a luxury she can't afford and that dignity is something you preserve in silence. Now get back to work, Dr. Sterling says, and he turns and leaves the break room like he's just delivered motivation instead of a death sentence. Sarah stands and walks back to the emergency department. Her hands are steady. Her shoulders are the same curve they've always been. No one looking at her would know that she's just been publicly announced as weak, expendable, someone whose departure would actually improve the department. No one looking at her would know that she's standing in a hospital in San Diego at 4 in the morning, 7,000 miles from Baghdad, and somehow she's still at war. She goes to her locker during a quiet moment at 4:30. She opens the door and the photograph of Michael is there, looking back at her with those clear water eyes, smiling like he knows something. Below the photograph, in the corner of the locker where the hinges create a small shadow, are the combat boots. They're caked with sand from a desert that doesn't exist anymore in the official record. The leather is cracked. The laces are frayed. The soles are worn thin from walking across compounds that were supposed to be classified, from running toward explosions that were supposed to stay off the news, from carrying supplies through villages where the people looked at her and saw something other than a woman in scrubs. She reaches down and touches the boot like she's touching a ghost. Her fingers are steady. Her breathing is controlled. But inside, where no one can see, something ancient and dangerous and absolutely lethal is beginning to wake up. The morning rounds begin at 6:15, fluorescent lights buzzing their mechanical hum above the intensive care unit. Sarah moves between beds with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times, checking monitors and 4 lines while the day shift trickles in with coffee cups and half-awake expressions. Dr. Sterling arrives at 6:47, 3 minutes early as always, his white coat pressed so sharply it could cut glass, his presence making the air pressure change the way it does before a storm. He reviews charts with the casual authority of a man who has never been questioned, never had to consider that someone else in the room might know more than he does. Patient in Bay 3 has been experiencing chest pain since 2:30 in the morning. Cocaine-induced vasospasm, confirmed by EKG and cardiac enzymes, his chest tight as a fist, his heart throwing arrhythmias like accusations. Sarah watched him through the night, administered oxygen, monitored his status, waited for the cardiology consult that never came. Now Sterling scans the chart and his jaw tightens. He pulls a pen from his coat pocket, a Mont Blanc, probably $400, and writes an order in his sharp angular script. Beta blocker. Propranolol, 20 milligrams, every 6 hours. The pen cap clicks shut like a gunshot. Sarah's eyes move across the order and something ancient inside her catalog the mistake, the way a radar system locks onto a target. Beta blockers are contraindicated in cocaine-induced chest pain. Every textbook says so. Every protocol in this hospital says so. The mechanism is simple, brutal physics. Cocaine floods the system with catecholamines, floods it with adrenaline that makes the heart race and the vessels constrict. A beta blocker removes the counterbalance, leaves the alpha-adrenergic surge unopposed, and the result is catastrophic vasospasm that could send this man into sudden cardiac arrest in the time it takes to say his name. She says nothing. Not yet. Sterling moves to the next patient. Sarah follows at a distance, her voice emerging soft and deferential, the way it always does in front of witnesses. Dr. Sterling, I wanted to clarify the order in Bay 3. The room goes still. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A resident drops his pen. Sterling turns slowly, his movements like something apex predators execute when they've spotted prey. His smile appears, the kind of smile that doesn't involve warmth, only teeth. Yes? The propranolol order. Sarah's voice remains steady, professional, the voice of someone requesting permission to exist. I was concerned about the contraindication with cocaine-induced spasm. Beta blockers can potentiate unopposed alpha-adrenergic stimulation and cause severe. Are you questioning my medical judgment? Sterling's voice cuts through the unit like a blade. He turns to face her fully, and the entire ER staff freezes, nurses and residents and paramedics caught in the sudden gravity of confrontation. His laugh is theatrical, designed to carry. I'm sorry, did the nurse just question my medical judgment? The emphasis lands hard. Not a nurse who happens to work at Oak Creek Memorial. Just the nurse. The category. The lesser thing. Sarah takes one measured breath. Her hands are steady. Her eyes are steady. But something old is waking up in her chest, something that learned to function under fire, and it takes everything inside her not to let it show on her face. Sterling's smile widens. He glances at the gathered staff, and his voice takes on the tone of someone sharing an amusing observation at a party. Let me make this interesting. I'm betting you quit within a week, sweetheart. Anyone want to take the other side? He laughs like it's the funniest thing he's said all month. Any takers? She looks tough, but they always do until they realize they don't belong here. A nurse near the EKG machine looks away. A resident studies his shoes. Nervous laughter ripples through the room like a contagion, the kind of laughter that happens when people sense which way the wind is blowing and they're not willing to blow against it. Sarah doesn't move. Her jaw tightens, just barely visible. The trembling isn't fear, it's restraint. One tear escapes down her scarred left cheek, not from sadness, but from the sheer effort of containment, the cost of keeping 20 years of training bottled behind the eyes of a woman who pours coffee and checks vitals. She wipes it away without breaking eye contact, her hand rising slowly, deliberately, the movement of someone in complete control. Her voice emerges like steel wrapped in silk, each word a small weapon perfectly placed. I've been on my knees in worse places than this, doctor, and I'm still standing. The silence that follows is absolute. The kind of silence that happens when someone says something true and everyone knows it, even if they don't understand why. Sterling's face darkens like a sunset over terrain nobody should stand in. His eyes narrow. He's just realized something critical. She's not going to break the way he expected. She's not going to cry in the supply closet or call her mother or start updating her resume. She's something else. She's something harder. He doesn't like it. The next day, Sarah moves through her shift like water finding its level, quiet and efficient and invisible. She works through her lunch break, stays late, documents everything, keeps her head down, does everything right. It's the kind of behavior that suggests she's learned the lesson, that she understands the hierarchy, that she knows her place. Sterling watches her from a distance and smiles like a man who's already won. But he's not done. He's just getting started. The cafeteria at Oak Creek Memorial smells like institutional gravy and burned coffee and something underneath that might be hope or might be resignation. Sarah fills a tray at 12:35, places a sandwich and a cup of soup and a bottle of water on the plastic rectangle, and turns to find a table. The afternoon sun comes through the windows in pale rectangular sections that don't quite illuminate anything. Dr. Sterling sits at a corner table with 3 department heads, the kind of men who golf together and make decisions over beers. He watches Sarah move toward an empty seat, and his foot extends into the aisle with the casualness of someone stretching, and Sarah's tray becomes a projectile. Soup splashes across the linoleum in a geometric pattern. Her sandwich slides under a table like it's running away. The plastic bowl clatters with the sound of something fragile breaking on impact. The cafeteria transforms into a gallery of eyes. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Sterling announces loudly, his voice carrying across every conversation. But then again, some people just can't handle the pressure of real medicine. He smiles at his colleagues, who smile back with the practiced ease of men who learned long ago not to question power. One of them chuckles. "It spreads like infection." Sarah drops to her knees without saying anything. She begins collecting the mess with steady hands, the motion so controlled it looks choreographed. Soup soaks into her scrub pants. The sandwich comes apart in her fingers. She picks up every piece, every scattered drop, her movements precise as a soldier's, which is a thing that should tell everyone here something, except they're all looking away or looking at Sterling, anyone but the woman on her knees cleaning up something she didn't spill. The whispers start. "Poor thing. Can't cut it. Sterling's right about her. Nobody helps her. Nobody says a word." When she finishes and stands, her scrubs are wet and her composure is intact and something in her eyes has changed. The deferential nurse is still there, still visible on the surface, but underneath it something else is moving into position like a chess piece. Sterling watches her walk away and his smile falters slightly. This is supposed to be breaking her. This is supposed to work. He doesn't understand yet that she's already been broken. 20 years ago. In a place where the temperature hit 118 degrees and the dust got into everything and the sound of helicopter rotors meant either rescue or death. That version of Sarah Chen shattered into 1,000 pieces and reformed into something harder, something that can't be hurt by a man in a $400 pen and pressed white coat. The third incident unfolds at 2:15 in the afternoon. Sarah stands at the nurse's station organizing patient charts, the file folders stacked in neat columns, everything documented and precise. She's wearing new scrubs, she changed after the cafeteria incident, and her hair is pulled back in a braid so tight it could stop blood flow. Sterling approaches from the west corridor like he's been waiting for this moment. He's been waiting. 36 hours of waiting. His patience is a predator's patience. He reaches the nurse's station, and his arm swings in a casual arc, like he's stretching, like his elbow just happens to connect with the stack of charts. 32 folders cascade to the floor like snow. Papers scatter across the linoleum in a blizzard of patient information and dosage records and vital signs, each page falling slowly, taking forever to land. The unit is quiet enough to hear the fluorescent lights hum. "Pick those up, sweetheart," Sterling says, loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice carries. His voice always carries. "That's right. Right where you belong." Sarah kneels again, gathering charts with hands that don't shake, hands that have held pressure dressings on arterial bleeds and stayed steady under conditions that would make most people's hands forget their function. She collects each paper with methodical precision, organizing them back into folders, restacking them in the correct order. Every chart. Every page. And she does it while Sterling watches with visible satisfaction, while the nurses pretend not to notice, while the residents find reasons to be elsewhere. But when she looks up from the floor, when she locks eyes with Sterling from her kneeling position, something ancient and dangerous moves across her face. It's just for a second. It's just for him. And in that second, Sterling realizes with sudden and absolute clarity that he's made a mistake. He's poked something that doesn't break. Something that only gets more certain about what needs to happen next. He returns to his office at 2:27 and closes the door. His hands aren't steady when he reaches for his phone, which surprises him. He's used to being steady. He's used to control. He dials the number for the hospital board member who golfs at his country club, the man who approved his last raise, the man who sits on 3 committees and knows where all the institutional pressure points are located. The conversation lasts for minutes. He explains his concerns about nursing competency. He mentions the questioning of medical judgment during morning rounds, a serious breach of protocol. He notes his observations about her work ethic, or lack thereof, and he uses words like liability and patient safety because these are the words that make administrators move. The next call goes to HR. He requests that they begin a formal documentation process, that they start building a file, that they monitor her performance with particular attention to medication administration and protocol adherence. He's very professional about it. He's very concerned. The final call is to an external consulting firm that specializes in staff investigations and performance review. He requests a comprehensive audit of Sarah's charts, her procedures, her medical judgment. He authorizes the cost, whatever it takes, and he makes it clear that he's initiating this process due to serious concerns about competency and patient safety. By 2:53, Sterling has activated a network. He's building a case. He's activating institutional power that doesn't require shouting or foot tripping or soup spilling. This is the power that actually matters. This is the power that ends careers quietly, in writing, with documentation and procedure and the immense weight of bureaucracy. He leans back in his chair and smiles because he understands something fundamental. Sarah can't fight back against something like this. No one can. He has no idea who he's standing next to. The call came through at 2:33 a.m. Trauma line from Naval Base San Diego. Training accident. Green Beret Colonel. Traumatic arrest. 5 minutes out. The ER mobilized like an orchestra that had played the same symphony 1,000 times. Trauma bays 1 through 4 lit up simultaneously. Respiratory therapy pulled the crash cart into position. The lab tech pulled up the blood bank protocols. Sarah moved through the controlled chaos with the precision of someone whose muscle memory had been forged in places most people would never know existed. This was different from the usual 2 a.m. overdoses and car accidents. This was someone who'd spent his life in the same world she'd left behind. Her hand steadied as she pulled the airway cart into position. Nobody noticed the shift in her breathing. Nobody saw the way her pupils dilated, the way her entire nervous system shifted into a frequency most civilians never accessed. This surge of purpose, this clarity, was what civilian medicine had never fully triggered. In the ER, she saved lives. In a combat zone, she'd saved something else. She'd saved the unit. She'd saved the mission. She'd saved soldiers who'd become family. The ambulance doors burst open at 2:52 a.m. The rotor wash from the medical helicopter still rattled the parking lot windows. The paramedic was shouting vitals as they rolled the stretcher. Colonel Marcus Webb, 64, found unresponsive during fast rope training exercise, no pulse for approximately 8 minutes en route, compressions initiated, 2 rounds epi, 1 amp of sodium bicarb. The colonel's body was a map of trauma. Abdominal distension. Chest wall lacerations. Blood pooling in his left shoulder. His face had the grey-white pallor of profound shock. The resuscitation team moved into position with practiced efficiency. Dr. Sterling took the head of the bed. 2 residents positioned themselves at the sides. Sarah stood at the foot, ready to manage the airway if they got return of spontaneous circulation. If. The word hung unspoken in the fluorescent-lit air. The heart monitor showed asystole. Flat line. The most honest rhythm of all, nothing. The ventilator hissed its mechanical rhythm as the resident bagged and mask ventilated. Compressions began. 1, 2, 3, 4. The metronome of desperation. One of the nurses counted, compression 60, 70, 80, 90. The 4 lines went in. Central line in the right internal jugular. The crystalloid fluid bag hung like an inverted pendulum, dripping hope into a system that had already given up. Dr. Sterling stood at the colonel's head, watching the monitor with the expression of a man who had already written the ending. His fingers were steepled, waiting. After 8 minutes of continuous compressions, his shoulders relaxed slightly. The body before them had already made its decision. The heart had already said no. "Okay," Sterling announced to the room, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. "This code is over. Time of death, 3:14 a.m. Someone call it." The room didn't move. The compressions continued. The ventilator continued its mechanical wheeze. "I said time of death," Sterling repeated, louder now. "Stop compressions. Call it." One of the residents stepped back from the bedside. The second one hesitated, hand still on the colonel's ribs, looking toward the attending for confirmation. Sarah's voice cut through the moment. "Quiet. Absolute. He has cardiac tamponade." The room froze. Sterling's head swiveled toward her. His expression was the expression of a man who had just heard a subordinate contradict him in front of witnesses. His face flushed. "He's been down for 18 minutes. Even if you were right, which you're not, it's too late. Step away from the patient, or I'm calling security." Sarah's eyes moved from Sterling's face to the ultrasound screen they'd wheeled into position. The distended neck veins. The muffled heart sounds. The specific presentation she'd seen before in a field hospital in Baghdad when a sniper round had caused blunt cardiac trauma. Blood was filling the pericardial sac. The heart couldn't fill. The heart couldn't pump. The heart couldn't live. This wasn't sepsis. This wasn't MI. This was mechanical. This was fixable. She looked at the colonel's face. At the thin vertical scar above his left eye. At the strong jawline that suggested someone who'd spent a lifetime making difficult decisions under pressure. Her hand moved to the ultrasound cart. She positioned the probe over his chest. The image crystallized. Blood. Dark. Surrounding the heart like a prison. The pericardium was compromised. Fluid was accumulating. Pressure was rising. The heart was drowning in its own blood. Something shifted in Sarah's posture. The quiet nurse who had spent 3 years moving invisibly through corridors, accepting insults, deflecting attention, staying below the radar, disappeared. What replaced her was someone else entirely. Someone whose hands had performed this exact procedure while mortar fire walked closer. Someone whose steady voice had ordered medics to move faster while her own heart was still. Someone who had made a promise to every soldier she'd touched that she would bring them home. She reached for the pericardiocentesis needle. Sterling's laugh was harsh. Bitter. "That's it. Security to the ER, now. This nurse is fired, effective immediately." He spun toward the charge nurse. "Document that she refused a direct order and attempted an unauthorized procedure. I want her credentials pulled tonight." His hand reached for the needle kit. His fingers moved with the territorial aggression of a man protecting his hierarchy. But Sarah had already positioned herself at the colonel's bedside. Her body created a shield between Sterling and the patient. It wasn't defiance. It was simpler than that. It was geometry. It was physics. It was the immovable object meeting the irresistible force, and the irresistible force would have to move through her body to reach that patient. "If you touch him now," Sterling hissed, his face inches from hers, "you'll never work in medicine again. I'll personally make sure of it. I have friends on every hospital board in California. Every single one. Your name will be radioactive. No hospital will touch you. No clinic will hire you. I'll destroy you so completely that within 6 months you'll be thinking about selling insurance from a folding table just to keep your apartment." The specificity of the threat, the casual cruelty of it, hung in the air like smoke. He was activating his network in real time. His fingers moved across his phone. Messages to the hospital administrator. to board members, to his attorney. The infrastructure of institutional power mobilizing in response to a single moment of resistance. Behind him, a security guard appeared in the doorway. Hand on his radio. Eyes on Sarah. She felt the weight of it. The moment when everything could collapse. The hidden life. The 3 years of careful invisibility. The false employment history. The deliberately buried past. All of it vulnerable to a single man who controlled access to the future. Sterling smiled. That's what I thought. Now step back and let the real doctors work. But Sarah was already moving. Her hands had executed this procedure in a sandstorm. Her hands had executed this procedure while 2 soldiers held pressure on their own injuries because there was no one else. Her hands remembered. Muscle memory. That's what they called it. As if memory lived in the muscles instead of in the bone-deep knowledge of someone who had walked through fire and not burned. The needle went in at the 5th intercostal space. Guided by the ultrasound. By touch. By the precise knowledge of exactly where the pericardium lived beneath skin and muscle and bone. The syringe was already attached. She drew back. Blood. Dark. Thick. Pooling into the syringe with the inevitability of truth finally speaking. Get security up here, now, Sterling was saying into his phone. I want her removed. I want her belongings boxed. I want her badge confiscated before she leaves the building. And somebody call HR because this is a formal termination, effective immediately. The needle continued to withdraw fluid. More blood. The pressure was rising. The accumulated volume was critical. 10 milliliters. 20. 30. With each milliliter removed, the pericardial sac relaxed slightly. The pressure on the heart decreased incrementally. How's the BP? Sarah asked, her voice steady as surgical steel. 80/40, the resident reported. And climbing. Heart rate. 112. Narrowing. The ultrasound showed it. The heart beginning to expand. The compressed chambers suddenly having space to fill. The physiology of trauma responding to the single correct intervention. The thing that Sterling had ordered stopped. The thing that he was now watching happen despite his command. Sarah extracted a total of 287 milliliters of blood from around the colonel's heart. Nearly 10 ounces of pressure released in less than 90 seconds. The heart that had been drowning suddenly could breathe. The monitor showed something. A flutter. An organized rhythm attempting to establish itself. The first whisper of electrical activity in nearly 20 minutes of asystole. Get me 2 units of ONEG, Sarah said. Wide open. And I need a call to cardiothoracic. This guy needs a pericardial window and a full trauma workup. Nobody moved. Everyone was staring at Sterling. Waiting for him to countermand the order. To reassert his authority. To prove that his hospital, his hierarchy, his rules still meant something. Sterling's face had gone the color of old concrete. His phone was still in his hand. His thumb hovered over the screen, not moving, frozen mid-threat. He watched as the colonel's oxygen saturation climbed. 86. 90. 94. As if Sarah's refusal to stop had somehow also forced the colonel's damaged lungs to remember how to work. The security guard in the doorway shifted his weight. Unclear now. The dynamic had changed. The nurse had just performed the exact procedure that the attending had ordered stopped, and the patient was responding. The hierarchy was collapsing in real time. But Sterling wasn't finished. Not yet. His fingers moved across his phone with the precision of someone familiar with institutional warfare. More messages. More calls. This was becoming something larger than a single confrontation in the ER. This was becoming a reckoning that would involve lawyers and board meetings and formal disciplinary hearings. Sarah kept working. The colonel was stable enough now to move. Stable enough to go to cardiothoracic. Stable enough to have a chance. That was all she'd promised him when she was 8 years old and he was 6 and burning, and she was pulling him from a Humvee while rounds walked past her like angry hornets. She'd promised him he'd come home. She kept promises. The next voice anyone heard wasn't the security guard. It was the charge nurse's phone. Ringing. At 3:17 a.m. She answered it with the confusion of someone being called in the middle of a crisis. "Yes," she said. "This is she." "What?" "No, I can't, right now She stopped. Her entire body went rigid. "Yes. Yes, of course. Right away." She hung up and looked at Sarah with an expression that suggested the earth had suddenly shifted on its axis. "That was the hospital administrator," she whispered. "From his home." "He said," she swallowed. "He said to preserve all of tonight's records related to this patient's treatment. Everything. And he said to make sure Dr. Sterling doesn't leave the building until someone from the legal department can speak with him." Sterling's phone fell from his hand. It landed on the tile floor with a sound like a small gunshot. Sterling's phone fell from his hand. It landed on the tile floor with a sound like a small gunshot. Sarah didn't look at it. Didn't look at Sterling. She looked at the monitor showing electrical activity that had flatlined 90 seconds ago, and she moved. Her hands were already moving before her brain caught up, the muscle memory taking over, the same hands that had worked in sandstorms, in the back of shaking helicopters with rounds punching through metal walls, in field hospitals where the lights ran on diesel generators and everything smelled like copper and burned plastic. "Step back," she said. Not a request. A command. The team froze. Even they could hear something different in her voice. Something that wasn't a night shift nurse's deference anymore. "I said step back." Sarah was already at the bedside, her eyes on the colonel's neck. The distended jugular veins. The muffled heart sound she'd heard on auscultation 2 minutes ago. Cardiac tamponade. Blood filling the pericardial sac, crushing the heart from the outside, turning it into a fist that couldn't pump. Sterling's voice cracked. "Chen, you will step away from that patient immediately. That is a direct order." Sarah didn't acknowledge him. She was already opening the procedure tray with her left hand while her right hand found the anatomical landmarks on the colonel's chest, the xiphoid process, the fifth intercostal space. Her fingers moved with the certainty of someone who had done this in darkness, in the back of a Black Hawk hammering through hostile airspace, with medics screaming coordinates and her hand steady as a surgical laser despite the rotor wash trying to throw her sideways. 14-gauge angiocath, she said quietly. A resident placed it in her palm without hesitation. Sarah's hand rose, positioning the needle at a 45-degree angle beneath the xiphoid process, angling toward the left shoulder. Everything in the room had gone still except for her hands and the heart monitor still showing that flat line. "Stop her!" Sterling's voice had climbed an octave. "Someone stop her right now. That patient is code status and she is." "Prepping the site," Sarah said. Her voice was calm as water. Her hands didn't shake. The skin over the xiphoid was already cleansed with betadine, already draping around her working hands like she was performing a ritual from another lifetime. Because she was. 20 years ago in Baghdad dust. 15 years ago in a training accident that wasn't an accident. 3 years ago in a field hospital with no air conditioning and water that came from jerry cans. The needle advanced. 1 centimeter. 2. Sarah's breathing didn't change. Her eye stayed focused on that narrow corridor of space beneath the sternum where the heart was drowning in its own blood. "Security!" Sterling was pointing now, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "Security, remove her from this patient now." 2 guards appeared in the doorway. But they didn't move toward Sarah. They stood there like they were watching something they didn't have the authority to interrupt. The needle advanced another centimeter. Sarah felt the resistance change as the pericardial membrane gave way. There was a sensation, subtle, one that only hands that had done this 100 times would recognize, of entering a space. The space where blood shouldn't be. She pulled back on the plunger. Dark blood filled the syringe. Not the bright arterial red of a wound. This was the color of stagnation, of pressure, of a heart being suffocated by fluid. The monitor that had shown nothing but flat lines suddenly beeped. Once. Twice. 60 ccs, Sarah said, her voice carrying a weight that made Sterling step backward. She continued drawing. The blood came in steady pulses as the pericardial pressure released, as the heart suddenly had room to beat again, as a dead man began to come back to life. 80 ccs. The monitor rhythm changed. The flat line broke into a wavering pattern. A junctional rhythm. Not sinus yet, but movement. Life responding to the space she was creating with nothing but a needle and her hands. 100 ccs. The colonel's chest suddenly heaved. His body drew a breath. His back arched off the stretcher like he was waking from drowning, because he was drowning, and Sarah's needle was letting the ocean out of his pericardium. Sarah withdrew the needle with the same precision she'd advanced it. Capped it. Set it in the kidney basin beside the stretcher like she was placing down a communion chalice. Her hands were steady. Her breathing hadn't changed. She might have just given this patient aspirin. Patient stabilized, she said to the room, to the monitors, to anyone listening. Her voice had dropped an octave. This wasn't the voice of a night shift nurse anymore. This was the voice of someone who had commanded teams under fire. He'll need surgical evaluation for the source of bleeding and formal pericardiocentesis in the OR, but he's viable for transport. The colonel's eyes were half open now. Confused. Alive. His hand moved, fingers grasping at the air like he was trying to grab the thread that had pulled him back from death. Sterling's face had gone the color of wet ash. His mouth opened and closed, opened and closed. That was contraindicated. Sarah turned to look at him. Her eyes were flat. Wrong call. Sterling found his voice in a rage that sounded like a man watching his entire careful structure collapse in real time. Get her out. Get her out of my ER right now. That is insubordination and assault, and he pointed at the security guards. If she doesn't leave this hospital in the next 10 minutes, I'm calling San Diego PD. The guards moved then. Not in anger. In something more like uncertainty, the way someone might approach a piece of equipment that had suddenly revealed itself to be far more complex than they'd understood. They took Sarah's arms gently, so gently, and she didn't resist. She'd made the decision the moment she'd refused to step back. She'd known it then. As they led her past the nurse's station, someone had already pulled her personnel file. HR was on the phone. She heard the words termination, immediate, grounds for discharge. The file was open on the desk, and she could see her own face in the 3-year-old photo they'd used for credentials. The face of someone who didn't exist. They walked her to her locker in the staff room. The guards waited while she packed her things. The photo of James in his navy dress uniform, the book she'd brought to work on slow nights, the coffee mug someone had given her that she'd never used. And at the bottom, wrapped carefully in an old t-shirt to protect them from the fluorescent lights and the pretending, the pair of worn combat boots caked with Baghdad sand. She carried them out in a clear plastic bag. The security guards walked her to the parking lot where rain had started falling, that rare San Diego rain that came down like someone had finally made a decision about the weather. Sarah drove on autopilot to Mountain View Cemetery, her scrubs still wet with the colonel's blood. She didn't bother changing. She parked and walked through rows of white headstones until she found the one with James's name carved in granite. Commander James Chen. Navy SEAL. Beloved husband. Taken too soon. She dropped to her knees in the mud. The rain soaked through her scrubs, through her knees, into the bone. Her fingers traced the letters of his name with shaking hands that had been so steady in the operating room. I failed you, she whispered through tears that mixed with rain. I promised. I promised I'd stay invisible. Promised I'd never surface, never blow the cover, never make them remember I was alive. Her hand pressed against the cold stone. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't let him die. There was a 6-year-old boy in that chest and I couldn't leave him there. The rain fell harder. Thunder rolled across the city like distant artillery. Sarah stayed there in the mud, her forehead against the granite, unaware that 48 miles north at Oak Creek Memorial, in the ICU on the 3rd floor, a pair of green eyes was beginning to flutter open. A Green Beret colonel who had been 6 years old in Baghdad was beginning to wake up. And the first thing his clearing vision found, sitting in a clear plastic bag at the nurse's station, was a pair of worn combat boots tagged with Sarah Chen's employee number. The fluorescent lights buzzed above the nurse's station like they were waiting for something. Colonel Marcus Webb's eyes moved across the ICU, across the machines monitoring his recovery, and landed on those boots. His breathing suddenly changed. His hand rose, trembling, pointing. "Ghost," he whispered. The word was barely audible, but every person in that unit heard it. Turned. Looked at the boots. Looked at each other with the expression of people who had just heard someone speak in a language they didn't understand but recognized as important. Dr. Sterling was standing at the foot of the bed, accepting congratulations from the hospital administrator, mid-sentence about his innovative decision-making, when the room went dead silent around that single whispered word. Dr. Sterling's phone was in his hand before the colonel's eyes fully opened, before the machines around the bed settled into their steady rhythm. He was already calling. Golf buddy at the hospital board. The administrator's private line. The chief of HR. His voice carried the smooth confidence of a man who'd spent 6 years learning exactly which buttons to push, which favors were owed, which doors opened when you knew the right people. "I need this handled," he said into the phone, his tone conversational, almost casual. The nurse who performed that procedure without authorization. "I want documentation. I want her employment history reviewed. Everything. And I want it fast." The board member on the other end, someone named Harrington who shot 18 handicap with Sterling every Thursday morning, didn't hesitate. By noon, outside investigators had arrived at Oak Creek Memorial with clipboards and grim expressions. They moved through the hospital like auditors hunting for fraud, pulling charts, scanning filing cabinets, photographing every form Sarah had ever signed. 3 nurses, 2 residents, and 1 billing clerk watched them work and said nothing. In hospitals, you learned early that staying invisible kept you employed. Sterling orchestrated it like a symphony. He contacted Sarah's references from her previous hospitals, facilities where she'd worked 3 years and left no trail, no pattern, nothing that made sense to anyone who didn't know she'd been erased. Those conversations went exactly as planned. "I'm sorry, we have no record of a Sarah Chen on staff," came the response from the first facility. "No forwarding information," said another. It was as if she'd never existed at all, which meant Sterling could construct any narrative he wanted. Incompetence. Insubordination. A pattern of risky decisions. A nurse in over her head. The investigators ate it up like dogs at a meat market. By the next morning, the hospital's legal team had compiled a termination package thick as a textbook. They walked it upstairs. HR scheduling adjusted immediately, Sarah's shift stripped away, her badge access flagged, her locker cleared by security who wore uncomfortable expressions and wouldn't meet her eyes. The protocol was always the same: remove the problem quietly, document everything obsessively, and let lawyers handle the questions. Sarah arrived for her shift at 6:08 p.m. to find 2 security guards and an HR representative named Michelle Okafor standing at the time clock, holding a manila envelope and wearing the expression of someone asked to fire a friend. "Sarah, we need to talk in the office," Michelle said, not meeting her eyes. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects trapped in glass. The office was beige and windowless, smelling of stale coffee and the particular institutional sadness of rooms where lives change. Michelle slid the termination letter across the desk. 17 pages. Falsified medical records. Unauthorized procedures. Operating outside her scope of practice. Insubordination. Patient endangerment. Every charge carefully constructed, every one provably false to anyone who looked closer than the surface, but Sarah understood nobody was going to look closer. They'd been told not to. The investigators found inconsistencies, Michelle said quietly, her voice the color of apologies that changed nothing. The allegations are serious enough that we can't in good conscience continue your employment. We're offering 2-week severance, and we'd prefer you not contest the termination. Your attorney? I don't have an attorney, Sarah said. Her voice sounded like it came from a long way away. Then I'd recommend you get one. Michelle slid a second envelope across the desk. Resources. Legal referrals. A benefits explanation. All the machinery of institutional removal running smoothly, professionally, completely impersonal. Security will escort you out. You'll have 30 minutes to collect your personal items. The walk to her locker was the longest hallway Sarah had ever traversed. Security flanked her like she was a prisoner being transferred, and the message was clear to every staff member who saw them moving through the corridors: don't talk to her, don't help her, don't associate with a problem being removed. The cafeteria where Sterling had knocked her tray was empty. The break room where he'd announced his bet was dark. The ER where she'd saved the colonel was a hive of activity 3 floors below, and she would never set foot in it again. Her locker contained almost nothing. 3 uniforms. A pair of trauma shears with a worn grip. A photo of James on a beach in San Diego, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling like people who believed in the future. The combat boots were gone, she'd left them in the bottom of the locker before the emergency with the colonel, a reminder of who she'd been, a prayer to whoever listened that she'd never have to be that person again. Security had already catalogued them as evidence. They sat in a clear plastic bag at the nurse's station, tagged and photographed and filed away with all the other documentation of her dismantling. It took 11 minutes to empty the locker completely. Sarah carried the box past the nurses who didn't wave goodbye, past the residents who suddenly became very focused on their charts, past the charge nurse who looked genuinely angry but couldn't do anything about it. The system had already spoken. Security opened the main doors. The San Diego evening air hit her face, still warm even at 7:15 p.m., and felt like a goodbye. The rain started 2 hours after she drove to Cypress View Cemetery, which seemed cosmically unfair, like the sky was joining in on the universal consensus that Sarah Chen's life was over. She stood at James's grave in clothes that weren't hers anymore, jeans, a hoodie, the uniform of an invisible person, and the rain hammered the cemetery in sheets that sounded like static on a dead radio. His headstone was simple. Commander James Chen. 1978 to 2019, beloved husband. Beloved son. It said nothing about what he actually was, what he'd known, what he'd kept secret to protect her. I failed you, she whispered. The rain was loud enough that she could speak without worrying about being heard. I promised you I'd keep the cover. I promised I'd stay dead. Stay invisible. Stay safe. Her fingers traced the engraved letters, the stone cold and wet under her touch. And I couldn't even do that. I just couldn't watch him die. He was just a kid that time, James. He was 6 years old and he was bleeding out and I couldn't. Her voice cracked, the first time it had cracked in front of anyone or anything in 20 years. I blew it all up. Everything you died to protect. And now they've won. Now they get the ending they wanted. Rain streaked her face, indistinguishable from tears, and Sarah knelt at the grave the way she'd knelt on desert floors in Iraq, the way she'd knelt in operating rooms when the bleeding wouldn't stop, the way soldiers kneel when they finally understand they're not invincible. The weight of 2 decades crashed down on her shoulders like a building collapsing in slow motion. She'd survived combat. She'd survived her own erasure. She'd built an invisible life so perfect no one questioned it. And she'd thrown all of it away for an instant, for a reflexive moment of saving someone who'd probably already been dead before his body hit the stretcher. 48 miles north, in the ICU of Oak Creek Memorial, Colonel Marcus Webb's eyes flickered open at 11:34 p.m. on his second night of consciousness. The ventilator breathed for him, a rhythmic whoosh that filled the silence. His vision swam, blurred at the edges, but focused gradually on the fluorescent ceiling panels overhead. Standard issue hospital ceiling. Voices somewhere distant. Machines beeping their steady heartbeat rhythm. He was alive. His lung capacity expanding, his blood oxygenating, his heart holding steady at 72 beats per minute. A nurse appeared above him, young, competent, checking the monitors with the precision of someone trained. "Colonel Webb? Can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." Her name tag read Lauren. Not the one who'd saved him. Webb's eyes tracked the room. Morning light coming through the window. Oak Creek Memorial. San Diego. He tried to speak and the endotracheal tube blocked the sound, so he moved his eyes instead, searching. Looking for someone. That's when he noticed the boots. They sat at the nurse's station, visible through the open ICU door, in a clear plastic evidence bag with a tag attached. Worn leather. Faded brown. The leather cracked and scarred in places where bullets and shrapnel had scored it. Military boots. Old military boots. The kind that had walked through deserts and been buried in mud and had carried someone through every circle of hell and still held their shape, still refused to break. Webb's fingers twitched involuntarily. Where? The tube prevented speech, so he pulled at it, trying to dislodge it, and the nurse immediately moved in. "Colonel, no, you need to stay calm. I'm going to page your doctor." She pressed the call button. Within minutes, a respiratory tech was there, explaining that the tube would come out once he was stable enough, that speech would return, that everything was going to be fine. But Webb's eyes stayed fixed on those boots through the glass door, and his mind was somewhere else entirely. 20 years evaporated. He was 6 years old again, lying in the dust outside his father's compound in Baghdad, his small body perforated by shrapnel, his blood painting the dirt. He saw the woman who'd pulled him out of the fire, young then, maybe late 20s, with the kind of eyes that had seen everything and refused to look away. She'd held his pressure dressings while a medevac landed. She'd whispered to him in English. "I've got you, little man. I've got you. You're going home." And he had. She'd made sure of it. She'd embedded herself in his memory so completely that sometimes as an adult he wondered if he'd imagined her, if trauma had constructed a savior that never actually existed. But those boots. Those were real. The next morning, when Dr. Sterling walked into the ICU room to check on his patient, ready to accept another round of congratulations from hospital staff about his miraculous save, Webb spoke his first clear word. His voice was hoarse, broken from the ventilator, but absolute. "Ghost." The monitors picked up the acceleration of his heart rate. Sterling stopped mid-sentence, his expression shifting from benevolent to something more concerned. "Colonel, you need to rest. Your lungs. Where is she?" Webb's eyes were locked on Sterling with the terrifying clarity of a man who'd been trained to identify threats, and he'd just identified a very big one. "The nurse. Boots at the station. Where is she?" "The nurse who performed the unauthorized procedure," Sterling said carefully, "has been terminated for her actions. She's no longer employed at this hospital. Now, let's focus on your recovery. Her name." Webb's voice got harder. "Tell me her name." The room had gone so quiet you could hear the ventilator pushing air through the tubes in its mechanical rhythm. Sterling's smile had frozen at the edges. "I don't think that's relevant to your care, Colonel. What is relevant is your rehabilitation. You were in cardiac arrest. The survival rate." The door to the ICU burst open and a young nurse named Lauren ran to the nurse's station, where she found Agent Maria Torres and FBI Special Agent Robert Hayes standing with a medical records box and expressions that meant someone's world was about to realign completely. Behind them stood a SEAL team leader, still in dress uniforms, one arm in a sling, watching Dr. Sterling with the particular disgust reserved for people who deliberately falsified records to hurt someone who'd saved lives. Agent Torres looked at the colonel. Then at the boots. Then at Sterling. "Dr. Anthony Sterling," she said, her voice like a judge's gavel hitting wood, "we have a warrant to review your employment records, your interactions with nursing staff, and specifically your conduct regarding Senior Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen. Sterling's face cycled through colors, shock to indignation to something that might have been panic. I have no idea what you're talking about. This is a medical emergency and I won't have federal agents disrupting patient care. You need to leave my ICU. Now. Agent Hayes was already moving, holding a folder so thick it barely fit in a standard manila envelope. Your performance reviews of Petty Officer Chen contain fabricated allegations. The investigation you initiated? We have the emails where you coordinated the false narrative with board members and outside investigators. You forged her employment history to justify her termination. That's fraud, Doctor. That's federal crime. The moment seemed to stretch like taffy. Dr. Sterling's hand moved toward his pager, a reflex, a gesture toward authority that no longer existed. Around him, ICU nurses were staring. A resident had his phone out, recording. One of the nurses who'd watched Sterling humiliate Sarah repeatedly stood with her arms crossed over her chest, and on her face was something like vindication. This is absurd, Sterling said, but his voice had cracked like old glass. I'm a department head. I'm on the hospital board. Do you know who I am? Agent Torres held out her hand, palm up. Turn around, please. I'm not turning around. My attorney. Your attorney knows you're here, Agent Hayes said flatly. He declined to come. He also strongly suggested you cooperate. The handcuffs went on with a click that echoed through the ICU like thunder. They were stainless steel, the kind that didn't hurt until you struggled against them, and Sterling's face went the color of old bone as security held his elbows and Agent Torres began the Miranda rights in a monotone voice that made clear how many times she'd done this exact thing. The walk started down the ICU corridor. Past the nurse's station where Sarah's boots still sat in their plastic bag. Past the monitors and the 4 stands and the careful choreography of people fighting death. Security doors opened. Staff emerged from rooms to watch. One resident, someone Sterling had once told to quit his job because his surgical technique wasn't hospital standard despite the fact that the resident had 3 times more successful outcomes, stood with his arms across his chest and didn't look away. The charge nurse Sterling had made cry over scheduling conflict stood with her jaw set and recorded the entire thing on her phone. They walked him through the ER where he'd ruled like a tyrant for 6 years, through the trauma bay where a nurse in faded scrubs had saved a man's life while he screamed that she was fired. Security guards who'd escorted Sarah out 2 nights ago now held doors open for federal agents walking Dr. Sterling past his kingdom. The local news was already in the parking lot, cameras rolling, because someone, possibly the colonel, possibly a nurse who'd had enough, had made sure the cameras knew to show up. By the time they loaded Sterling into the FBI vehicle, the hospital administrator had issued a statement about fully cooperating with federal investigators and placed Sterling on immediate suspension. His office was being sealed. His credentials were suspended pending review. Within 24 hours, 3 other nurses came forward with documented instances of Sterling falsifying records and retaliating against staff members who'd questioned his orders. A patient's family attorney subpoenaed his files and discovered a pattern of altered charts spanning for years. The network Sterling had spent 6 years building, board members, country club connections, golf buddies who owed him favors, evaporated like morning fog. No one returned his calls. His attorney negotiated a plea agreement. Within 3 weeks, Sterling lost his medical license, his hospital privileges, his position, his reputation, everything he'd constructed. 6 months later, someone spotted Dr. Sterling at a strip mall on the edge of San Diego, sitting at a folding table with insurance company brochures in front of him. His suit was wrinkled. His face was gaunt. He was trying to sell term life insurance to people passing by, and no one stopped. Sarah stood in full dress uniform at the Oak Creek Memorial Veteran Appreciation Ceremony, the weight of ribbons on her chest feeling like armor and like chains all at once. Her combat boots had been retired to a shadow box mounted on the wall outside the ER, with a small plaque engraved underneath, in honor of those who serve in silence. Colonel Marcus Webb stood beside her in his green beret dress uniform, walking with only a slight limp despite the fact that he'd been in cardiac arrest 72 hours before she'd knelt at her husband's grave and whispered apologies to the dead. Her hand rested on his shoulder while he told the assembled crowd about a 6-year-old boy bleeding out in Baghdad and a young sailor who wouldn't let him die. He told them about that same sailor saving him a second time, 20 years later, when everyone else had given up. Senior Chief Chen taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, he said, his voice steady and strong. It's doing what's right even when it costs you everything. The camera in Sarah's mind pulled back to show the hospital staff, nurses who'd watched her be humiliated, residents who didn't speak up, administrators who'd processed her termination without question. Some met her gaze with shame. Others with newfound respect. All of them understanding now that they'd tried to fire a ghost, and ghosts, by definition, can't be killed. If you made it this far, you already know that sometimes the bravest warriors carry stethoscopes, not guns. Subscribe to see more stories about the heroes you've never heard of. Like and comment with your thoughts. What would you have done in Sarah's position?